In the quiet Oregon countryside, amidst picturesque hills and winding country roads, surrounded by centuries-old pines and oaks, stood a time-worn farm. It was the property of Susan Monica, a person of mystery and aloofness. Few of the locals suspected what horrors lurked behind the peeling walls of the farm buildings. It wasn't until 2014 that the sinister mystery of the place was dispelled like a thick fog. While searching the farm, investigators discovered the partial remains of two missing men, Robert Haney and Stephen Delcino. This find was the first drop in a whole waterfall of shocking discoveries that followed. As this macabre case unfolded, a truly horrifying story came before the astonished eyes of the public. A story of murder, dismemberment of bodies, and how for years Susan Monica herself wallowed in lies to cover up her heinous deeds. "You value pigs more than you value people," the judge would later say when sentencing her. And those words, hitting with the force of a guilty verdict, reflected the very essence of the coming story of the nightmare that had been going on for years in this seemingly peaceful farming community. To fully understand the origins of what is happening, it is necessary to look back at the history of Susan Monica herself. This person was shrouded in mystery, which was partly responsible for the tragic events. Monica was born on July 8, 1948 in California, then still under the name of Stephen Buchanan. About her early years of information is practically not preserved. It is known only that the young Stephen decided to link his fate with the Navy, and during the Vietnam War was in the epicenter of hostilities, receiving several prestigious awards for bravery and courage. After returning from the armed forces, Buchanan underwent a course of radical transformation. He decided to completely change sex and live the rest of his life as a woman named Susan Monica. The reasons for such a radical decision is not known. Perhaps they were rooted in childhood traumas and psychological disorders of the heroine of our story. According to some reports, after the sex change operation, Susan for some time worked as an engineer in one of the major companies. However, the routine of civilized life clearly did not suit her rebellious nature. In 1991, Monica made a fateful decision. She completely broke with urban society and purchased a 20-acre plot of land in the remote rural town of Weimar in Oregon. On this vast tract of land, she developed an entire farming empire. Goats, chickens, pigs, and other wildlife grazed on her land. Monica personally erected several outbuildings, including a spacious barn for livestock and a blacksmith shop for wrought iron work. It was then that she started her own company, White Queen Construction, specializing in original handcrafted fences and hedges. In the expansive home built on the edge of the farm, Monica lived all alone. Apparently, she shunned human society, avoiding social contact. The only creatures that brightened her reclusiveness were her pets, numerous cats, dogs, and of course piglets, which Monica adored almost more than anything else in the world. It is in relation to these pink-cheeked inhabitants of the stable, her affection over time grew into something much deeper and perverse than simple human affection. Subsequently, the investigation of the murders will reveal to the world this morbid passion of Monica's, a passion that motivated her to go to the most monstrous and nightmarish acts. Loneliness on the farm had never been a problem for Monica. She hardly needed human companionship. However, to keep the farm functioning, she periodically needed helpers for small jobs and auxiliary tasks. So in the fall of 2013, she was joined as a handyman by Robert Haney, a middle-aged man largely disillusioned with the modern world and dreaming of finding a quiet haven away from the hustle and bustle of life. For Haney, this job at Monica's farm seemed like the perfect opportunity to fulfill his dream of living a simple, measured life in nature, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. As a reward, he was promised a small salary and the opportunity to live right on the farm in a specially equipped trailer. For the first few months, everything went smoothly. Haney, with his usual diligence, performed a variety of work, from repair work to maintenance of farm machinery and animal care. Absorbed in his new job, he enjoyed the peace and quiet of the land. Monica, on the other hand, had little contact with her new employee, preferring to socialize only when necessary and spending most of her time alone. By December 2013, however, it became apparent to Haney's relatives that something was going on with their loved one. For more than 2 months, they had not heard from him. Phone calls went unanswered. Letters were never answered. It was very unlike Robert, who used to keep in touch with his family. The first to sound the alarm were Haney's children, Jesse and Ashley. More and more often in their family circle began to sound alarming talk about possible reasons for such a long silence. There were all sorts of speculations, from an accident to Roberts going into seclusion for religious reasons. But none of these speculations seemed convincing. Eventually, the family couldn't bear the oppressive anxiety over their father's fate and decided to act. On January 1st, 2014, Jesse and Ashley went straight to Susan Monica's farm with the firm intention of finding out what had happened to Robert. Already upon their arrival, they were overcome with a bad feeling. The farm, once a well-maintained area, now gave a depressing impression of abandonment. There were piles of garbage, broken boards, and rusty scrap metal everywhere. The air was saturated with a disgusting mixture of the odors of droppings, rot, and something indefinable, but unaccountably frightening. Jesse and Ashley literally winced with revulsion with every step they took through this apocalyptic landscape. Finally, they reached Robert's trailer, but instead of their father, they were greeted only by his faithful dog Bobby and his personal belongings, still lying in their usual places. His leather jacket, all the tools he'd taken with him. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, Jesse later recalled in an interview with crime reporters. Monica herself behaved extremely aloof and indifferent when the Haney children tried to ask her about Robert's whereabouts. She limited herself to a dry statement that he had allegedly quit his job and left the farm months ago. The woman steadfastly refused to elaborate on the details. Such vague explanations only increased the suspicions of the Haney family. They immediately went to the police, filing a missing persons report for their father. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office, which had jurisdiction over the area, immediately began operational efforts to locate Robert Haney. The massive investigation that unfolded at Monica's farm could have been avoided if the owner herself had not tried to confuse the investigation with her contradictory testimony at the very beginning. But in reality, the unfortunate woman only added fuel to the fire of suspicion that engulfed her. The initial version that she put forward to the investigators, more like a cheap trick than a plausible explanation. According to her story, one fall day in 2013, she was allegedly on her way to the piggery when her attention was drawn to the noisy quacking of birds scurrying restlessly in the far corner of the paddock. As she approached, Monica was startled to discover the cause of their confusion. It was none other than Robert Haney, lying surrounded by pigs frantically devouring something pink and shapeless. But what was most frightening was that, upon closer inspection, Monica recognized the tortured creature as a living human being. Haney was still alive, but his entrails had been disemboweled by the clucking animals. Monica testified that at that moment she was allegedly horrified by the gruesome scene, and taking pity on the doomed victim, shot Haney at point-blank range to end his torment. She explained the murderous shot by the fact that she was accustomed to put to sleep in this way hopelessly wounded pets. And at that fatal moment, her hand did not tremble to shoot a man dying of terrible wounds in the same manner. Subsequently, according to her story, she was elementary confused, not knowing what to do with the body, so she never did anything. Haney's remains were simply left lying where they were eaten by pigs, stray animals not attracted by human conventions. For the first few minutes after this bloody confession, there was a deafening silence in the interrogation room. The Jackson County investigators looked around with unspeakable amazement on their faces. None of them had ever encountered a story so gruesome and bizarre. Detective Eric Henderson, who was leading the investigation, was the first to break the sepulchral silence. He tried to gently clarify some of the illogical points in the testimony of Monica, but she only shrugged her shoulders indifferently, saying that she did what common sense told her in that monstrous situation. But Detective Henderson's experienced detective's instincts, ingrained in him from childhood, told him that there were major flaws and omissions in the story, behind which lay something more sinister. He felt that Monica was far from having fully exposed her secrets to justice. Indeed, the events of the next few days exceeded Henderson's wildest expectations. The operatives who arrived to search the farm discovered a scene so staggering and nightmarish that it made even the most experienced officers of the law shudder with revulsion. The entire vast territory of the farm was in a state of extreme desolation. Huge piles of garbage, debris, and manure piled up everywhere, emitting a mixture of unbearable odors of decay and rot. This had once been a well-maintained and tidy farmstead. But the most horrible discovery, of course, was a severed human leg found in a far corner of the barn. This discovery became the last straw in the cup of doubts of the investigation. Soon at the interrogation, Monica herself confessed to the murder and dismemberment of the second person. This time, the heartbreaking details of the gruesome atrocity shocked everyone present in the interrogation room. According to Monica's new testimony, her second victim was one Stephen Delcino, a 59-year-old handyman whom the woman hired in 2012 for various household needs. Monica's further account finally buried her former image of a harmless and reckless farmer. In it, she appeared before the court of inquiry in the guise of a cold-blooded killer who has contaminated her hands with blood not for the first time. According to her, in August 2012, a sudden scuffle broke out between her and Delcino over a mundane domestic quarrel. The fight erupted over two guns that belonged to Monica, which she allegedly found in her employees' belongings. Monica attempted to seize the misappropriated weapons and a life-and-death struggle ensued. In the heat of the battle, a fatal shot rang out. As it turned out, Monica grabbed one of Delcino's guns and accidentally pulled the trigger. The bullet hit him exactly in the back of the head, which was a fatal blow for him. After the murder, Monica, with her usual cold-bloodedness, simply dismembered the corpse and buried the remains in different parts of the farm. The murderer did not stop at this horrifying confession. In the presence of stunned from such revelations of the investigators, she ruthlessly pointed out with a pencil on the farm Weimar, where exactly were buried the remains of the unfortunate Delcino. And this was only the beginning of a whole chain of such ominous indications. Like a raging giant, the thirst for blood and death overwhelmed Susan Monica's mind. As if breaking the shackles of years of silence, she bombarded the investigation of a flood of confessions capable of shocking any, even seen the species of man. As it turned out, the heinous murders of Robert Haney and Stephen Delcino were only the tip of the iceberg of criminal activity of this hellspawn. When Detective Henderson bluntly asked Monica if there were other burials on her farm, she responded with a phrase like a thunderclap. "If I tell you about 17 others, you'll put me in jail for the rest of my days." This almost condescending sneer paralyzed the stunned interrogators. In that second, they realized with their own eyes what a monstrous and cold nature they were dealing with. Until a few minutes ago, the seeming account of the murders of Haney and Delcino had been seen as a rare case of brutality and insanity in a fit of passion. Now, however, it appeared that behind it all lay a completely different story. The story of a string of premeditated murders that only a hardened serial killer could commit. And the further course of the interrogation finally dispelled the last crumbs of doubt in the belonging of Monica to this most dangerous and repulsive category of criminals. In a matter of minutes, her testimony has acquired a mass of new disgusting details, until then unseen even in the practice of scene kinds of detectives. Monica began to naturally juggle different versions of the murder she had already described, finally becoming entangled in her own contradictions. Then she claimed that she shot Delcino out of self-defense, then suddenly stated that he allegedly shot himself several times in the head. Then she claimed that she shot Delcino in self-defense. Then suddenly she claimed that he allegedly shot himself several times in the head. And even began to improvise on the fly, putting forward completely new bizarre scenarios of his death. Just as chaotically changed versions and regarding the tragedy with Robert Haney. At first, Monica insisted on her story about how the pigs were torturing the unfortunate man alive, and she allegedly tried to stop his torture with a gunshot. Later, however, she suddenly remarked that she could not confirm with certainty whether Haney was still alive at the time of the shooting. Apparently, the suicide bomber had woven a web of lies out of the smallest scraps of truth, protecting herself and justifying her heinous atrocities with far-fetched stories. Moreover, she obviously deliberately confused the investigation in order to confuse the operatives in her own, only known to her secrets. The apogee of this bacchanalia of delirium was the moment when Monica suddenly jumped to her feet and announced in full voice, "If you want, I can demonstrate exactly how I killed Delcino for 10 seconds. And before the dumbfounded detectives blinked an eye, she had already taken the pen at the ready and with a manic gleam in her eyes began to play a whole pantomime, depicting the process of shooting her victim. The guards could only watch this gruesome scene helplessly, having completely lost the thread of rational explanation for what was happening. Here before them sat not a human being, but a real devil of hell, for whom murder was not a crime, but almost an art. It was at that moment that the investigators were finally convinced. Susan Monica is not just a cold-blooded killer, but probably a whole serial killer, masterfully juggling false stories to cover up their atrocities. How many more innocent lives could be on her conscience? Of course, after all these monstrous revelations, Susan Monica's fate was sealed. In the jury trial, the prosecutor's office launched an entire campaign to expose the perverted personality and malicious motives of the defendant. The prosecutors used all available video and audio recordings of interrogations where Monica herself exposed herself as a ruthless monster who mocked human life. In one such recording in particular, she reasoned in a cynical tone, "I don't place much value on human lives. The only thing wrong with this planet is that there are humans on it. If it weren't for us, all the other animals, like the extinct dodos, would still exist." In contrast to this chilling confession from a cold-blooded killer, prosecutors presented hard evidence, forensic examinations of the victim's remains, which showed that Delcino had suffered 3 to 4 gunshot wounds to the head and that Haney's legs had been chopped with an axe before being nibbled by animals. On top of this gruesome mosaic was a videotape from Monica's jail cell showing her receiving a card from her cellmate with the heartbreaking caption, "From the sweetest killer in Jackson County." It is quite obvious that after such a murderous evidence base for the defense, Monica's attorneys could only desperately try to keep her alive by admitting the very guilt of the defendant. In the last word, they timidly mentioned some possible mental trauma, allegedly experienced by Monica in childhood, which could be the cause of her moral degeneration and loss of value of human life. However, these half-hearted motions did not have the expected effect. On April 21, 2015, just an hour after entering the deliberation room, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all counts: 2 murders, abuse of bodies, and identity fraud. In handing down the final verdict, Judge Tim Barnack harshly chided Monica for her heinous acts, ridiculing the very attempt to portray her insanity as the result of psychological trauma. "I don't know how else to put it any other way, Miss Monica. You valued your pigs far more than you valued your people. You may sound cruel, but you are a cold-blooded killer." By court order, Susan Monica was sentenced to 2 consecutive 25-year sentences for a combined total of 50 years behind bars. For the 67-year-old woman, that effectively meant life in prison without parole until she was very old. To this day, many troubling questions still hover around the Susan Monica farm. Investigators noted that the remains of Haney and Delcino were scattered around the property in plastic bags. Such organized dismemberment hints that their deaths were not spontaneous outbursts of violence. In addition, Monica's claim of a possible 17 other victims on her land was never refuted. After her conviction, no further search for additional victims seems to have been conducted. The story of the Susan Monica farm murders illustrates how evil can take root when sheltered from view. Her ability to kill and dismember 2 and possibly more people shows the frightening depths of human cruelty. However, there are teachable moments in this story. The perseverance of the Haney family brought attention to the case and secured justice for their relative. And the painstaking work of the investigators to expose Monica's lies and entanglements ultimately led to a just conviction. The murders on Susan Monica's farm will likely haunt rural Oregon communities for years to come. But the determination of those who faced that darkness and brought it to light remains inspiring. The tragic events on the secluded farm were a frightening reminder of how deeply evil can penetrate when hidden from the public eye. However, the story also shows that through perseverance and principles, justice was eventually served to the innocent victims. These horrific crimes shocked people with their inhumanity, but the response of society and law enforcement demonstrated that even the darkest atrocity cannot escape retribution. Let this story serve as a warning of the harmful effects of alienation and cruelty, but also as a testament that good will ultimately triumph over all darkness.